There was a time when silence meant reflection. Now, silence simply means absence. We live surrounded by data, opinions, and distractions, yet real understanding has become rare. The modern human has access to more knowledge than any generation before, and yet has never been so lost. We scroll endlessly, feeding on information that feels like thinking, but isn't. We are drowning in facts, but starving for meaning. Ignorance has evolved. It no longer hides in darkness. It performs under the brightest lights. It dresses in confidence and calls itself authenticity. We used to look for truth. Now we look for validation. People no longer argue to discover what's real. They argue to defend their identity. Emotions have replaced evidence. Volume has replaced reason. And outrage has become the universal language of the age. You can silence 50 scholars with one fact, but you cannot silence a fool with 50 truths. Because foolishness today is not about lack of knowledge, it's about the refusal to learn. In an age where emotion is currency, ignorance is profitable. The world doesn't punish stupidity anymore, it rewards it. Algorithms feed it, platforms monetize it, and society applauds it. Critical thinking, once humanity's sharpest tool, has become a relic. We have built a civilization where questioning feels like aggression, where doubt is treated as betrayal, and where comfort is worshipped as truth. The result is a kind of collective hypnosis, a civilization that moves faster every day but knows less about where it's going. The tragedy of our age isn't that people don't know the truth, it's that they no longer care to. When a species stops valuing truth, it stops evolving. Civilization doesn't collapse through war or fire. It collapses when minds grow too tired to question. That is the quiet, beautiful, and devastating suicide of reason. To understand how we got here, we must remember where we began. More than 25 centuries ago, in the crowded streets of Athens, a man walked barefoot, asking questions that shattered the illusions of his time. His name was Socrates, and his weapon was not a sword, but a question. He would stop citizens in the market and ask them what they believed and why they believed it. Their answers fell apart under his calm, relentless curiosity. Socrates revealed something terrifying, that most people live entire lives without ever examining the foundations of their beliefs. His words, "I know that I know nothing," were not a confession of weakness, but an act of strength. They meant that wisdom begins only when arrogance ends. That was the birth of philosophy, the courage to doubt. It was not about building walls of ideology, but about tearing them down. It was about freeing the mind from the prison of certainty. Yet Athens could not tolerate such freedom. A society that depends on conformity cannot survive too much truth. And so, the first philosopher was condemned for teaching people to think. His death was supposed to silence philosophy, but instead, it immortalized it. Plato turned his questions into dialogues. Aristotle transformed them into logic. And centuries later, Kant and Voltaire reignited the same fire with a single phrase: sapere aude. Dare to know. To think critically is to refuse obedience. To question is to become dangerous. Socrates proved that ignorance is not a lack of information. It is the arrogance of certainty. His legacy lives on every time someone dares to ask why. But in our time, that question has gone missing. The modern world doesn't execute philosophers, it simply ignores them. The punishment is softer, but the result is the same. We are living in a time that celebrates knowledge and despises wisdom. The question has died, and with it, the freedom of the mind. The internet was supposed to make us smarter. It promised to democratize knowledge, to connect humanity, to give everyone a voice. But what we built instead was an echoing labyrinth of noise. We created a world where truth competes with entertainment, and entertainment always wins. We have access to every piece of data ever recorded, yet we use it to build filters that hide us from anything uncomfortable. Psychologists call it information overload. It's not just mental fatigue, it's the slow suffocation of curiosity. The human brain is not built to process endless stimulation. It reacts, it judges, it scrolls. It no longer contemplates. Daniel Kahneman described two modes of thought. One fast, emotional, instinctive. The other slow, deliberate, rational. Our ancestors survived through the second. We survive through the first. We have outsourced our thinking to machines. We don't store wisdom. We store bookmarks. We don't remember ideas. We remember where we saw them. When the mind is never challenged to hold and analyze, it begins to atrophy. The more we rely on technology to think for us, the less capable we become of thinking at all. This is the paradox of our age. We know everything, but understand nothing. Information has replaced understanding. We can describe how the world works, yet we have forgotten how to ask what it means. We've confused having access to truth with having a relationship to it. Technology has not liberated us. It has enslaved our attention. The internet doesn't control what you think. It controls how often you think. It replaces deep reflection with constant reaction, turning the mind into a flickering screen of impulses. And this is why our civilization, rich in knowledge but poor in clarity, moves like a sleepwalker, awake but unthinking, informed but blind, connected yet completely alone. If information overload weakens the mind, echo chambers destroy it. Humans are tribal creatures. We crave belonging, often more than we crave truth. In the digital age, that craving has become a product, sold, tracked, and optimized. Algorithms have learned how to feed us what we already believe, turning the search for truth into a mirror of our own opinions. You no longer need censorship to control thought, you only need comfort. People naturally surround themselves with agreement. They follow voices that sound like their own and call that community. They block disagreement and call that peace. But what grows inside an echo chamber is not truth. It's fragility. When your beliefs are never tested, they become idols. When your perspective is never challenged, your vision narrows until you mistake your reflection for reality. The tragedy is that even the most rational people fall into this trap. The skeptic who questions everything except himself. The intellectual who believes his reason makes him immune to bias. In the end, arrogance and ignorance always find a way to look alike. Real thought begins where comfort ends. The Socratic spirit thrived on discomfort, on being wrong, on being challenged, on being forced to confront contradictions. But our era treats discomfort as danger. We have built a culture that protects feelings at the expense of truth, and calls it compassion. Echo chambers are not just digital, they are psychological. They are families, workplaces, nations, and ideologies that reward obedience and punish curiosity. We have traded the freedom of thought for the safety of belonging. We have mistaken noise for dialogue and agreement for understanding. And the result is a species that can no longer distinguish conviction from programming. A world that no longer tolerates doubt becomes a world incapable of growth. That is not evolution, it's domestication. To think in an age of noise is to resist. Critical thinking is not just a tool, it is a form of rebellion. It begins with the smallest act of courage, the willingness to question your own mind. Ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if the truth lies in what I've refused to see? Every time you question your beliefs, you tear down one more illusion. This is not cynicism, it's purification. The goal is not to destroy certainty, but to earn it. Thinking is not a reflex, it's an act of creation. It requires solitude, patience, and pain. In a world that worships speed, the act of slowing down to reflect is revolutionary. When something outrages you, pause before reacting. When something flatters you, doubt it. When everyone agrees, listen to the one who disagrees. The ability to hold discomfort without running from it. That's what builds a strong mind. Curiosity must become sacred again. It is not just the desire to know, it's the refusal to settle. Read thinkers who disturb you. Listen to those you dislike. Engage with ideas that dismantle your worldview. Because philosophy is not about being right. It's about staying awake. Schools teach what to think, not how to think. Society rewards compliance, not reflection. True intelligence, however, begins when you stop trying to belong. When you begin to think not for approval, but for truth. When you stop consuming ideas and start digesting them. Critical thinking is not a luxury, it's survival. A mind that cannot question is a mind that can be controlled. Socrates knew this when he said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But perhaps, in our age, the unexamined world is not worth saving. If there is hope for the future, it lies in those who can still think for themselves. Because when truth dies, it doesn't vanish, it takes humanity with it. And maybe, just maybe, the only way to revive the world is to resurrect reason.